Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to be focusing on Joe Conley, who played Ike Godsey. If you enjoy these segments, please do hit like and subscribe. I had this question from Janet Louise, who said, I really liked Ike's character. What was he like in real life? Was he similar to his character? Can you talk about him? So that prompted this little bit of a look deeper into Ike and Joe Conley, who played him, and Joe's life. Joe was born in 1928 in Buffalo, New York, and he passed away in 2013 at 86. He started acting in school. He started sort of acting a little bit more than after returning from his military service in Korea. Tony Becker spoke about finding out that Joe had like some sort of a medal on his jacket at some event, and Tony asked about it, and he said it was a silver star. Joe was awarded that as well as the Purple Heart for his service in Korea. He was a second lieutenant in a field artillery unit. So that was that sort of interrupted trying to get his acting career going. And then when he returned from Korea, he continued pursuing his acting. Joe's first credit was sort of uncredited. It was in the 1950 film, The Sound of Fury, as Man in Crowd. And then he has TV credits that seem to start around 1955. So while in Hollywood, he did all sorts of jobs to support himself while he was a struggling actor. He was a waiter, he pumped gas, he was a salesman, he was a substitute teacher, and then became a full-time teacher for a while. He sang in clubs all around Hollywood, and then he got an agent and started doing film and TV roles. He also then started in real estate because he was looking for something that might serve him better in terms of making a career. And he did very well in that. He at one point had 4 different franchise offices of Red Carpet Realty and ran those offices. And after a number of years of successfully selling real estate, representing both buyers and sellers. And he found that really was not just his fallback, but in many cases, his primary work, and allowed him to do the acting work and not necessarily have to make a living as an actor. In 2009, Joe published his autobiography, Ike Godsey of Walton's Mountain. And it was a fun, short read about his life and career. And I was reading some reviews, and some readers were disappointed, I guess, that it wasn't all about the Waltons, and that's what they were expecting. And so they weren't that particularly interested in his life. But I was, and I think many of you would be too. Obviously, Janet Louise is interested in his life. So he covers how his early life and then getting going, and really sort of chronicles what it can be like to be an actor, someone trying to break into acting. And I found that very interesting. I mentioned that he sang in a number of clubs around Hollywood, and that led to him making some various different contacts that helped to further his career, different people who frequented clubs that he sang at, and then he had conversations with them, and they turned out to have a position someplace, and one thing led to another, and he got an agent, and then he got a better agent, and then he started getting work in film and television. Castaway with Tom Hanks, The Brady Bunch, Felony Squad, Beverly Hillbillies, 4 episodes of Bracken's World, The Carol Channing Show, Green Acres, Mr. Ed, he did 6 episodes of, Gunsmoke, Dennis the Menace, he did 2 episodes, Death Valley Days, The Danny Thomas Show, Playhouse 90, Dragnet, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Lassie. So those are just a handful of, the various different shows that he worked on besides the Waltons. And evidently in about 1971, work had kind of dried up for him in terms of the acting, and he was married to his second wife, Louise, and they had at least one child, I think maybe another one on the way, or they had 2 children, and he needed to be able to support his family, and the acting just wasn't fully doing it. And so he decided to quit the acting and just commit himself more to the real estate, which was doing well. So he told his agent that he wasn't going to go out on any more auditions. And then in 1972, he got a call from his agent. This is all according to his book. And his agent said she'd had a request from Pam Polifrone, who was the casting director of The Homecoming and The Waltons. And there was a role that she thought that he was right for and wanted him to come in and take a meeting, basically. So he debated it and finally decided that he would go. What did he have to lose? So he went in, and it turned out he thought he'd be auditioning. He wasn't sent any actual scenes or anything, but he figured that would be a first thing. And then if they liked him enough, then he'd have a callback where they would ask him to read for the character of Ike. But evidently, when he went in, it was strictly a meeting. Pam was there, and, the producers were there. And they just chatted with him, and he didn't think it went particularly well. And he left thinking, I'll never hear anything again. And I guess it was some time before he heard back and was literally offered the role. So he never actually read for it, but it was really, he said, on the recommendation of Pam Polifrone, who I guess had cast him in other things before and really thought highly of his work. And so they hired him as Ike Godsey. He said his initial contract was for 7 of 13 episodes, which is interesting because his recollection was that they were only initially committed to 13 episodes for the series, but because the ratings really took off, we started really low, but it came up, and it was like in number 1 by, I think, about the 13th episode. So they renewed for an additional either 13 or 12. I think we did 25 or 26 in the first season. And so he said he ended up doing 1 or 2 days in most episodes, and usually not more than about 4 hours of work. So he continued to work in real estate throughout the entire series. And he would go into his office. If he didn't have an early call, he'd go in before, and then he'd go back to the office after his time on the set. This worked out well for him because it wasn't, like the rest of us, a full-time commitment. We were committed to all the episodes in the season, and so we weren't really free to do other things. Something amusing that caught my attention in the book was that he spoke about coming on to the sound stage and the dimness of it, except for where the lights would be focused because of where they were filming. And I remember that too, because the overhead lights that lit the whole sound stage were way up high in the top of the sound stage, and those wouldn't be turned on until either the beginning of the day when they were bringing equipment in or end of the day when they were clearing things out. The rest of the time, those were off. And so the light within the soundstage was coming from the glow of the lights from whatever set they were shooting on. So he said that, he would come in, and that he mentioned this sort of circle of chairs with low voices, speaking. And he said that was the parents, predominantly the mothers and guardians. I think David's father brought him occasionally, his stepfather, but most of the time it was the women, the mothers and guardians, and that they were chatting and stuff like that. And then he went on to name the 6 children, who of course did not include Richard Thomas, who was no longer a child. I found it amusing, as he listed all the children, that he got my name wrong. He called me Judy Taylor, which I never went by, as you probably know. Initially, I was Judy Norton. Then I was Judy Norton Taylor. And then I went back to just Judy Norton. So whether he just thought that's what he remembered, he did write this in, around 2009. So he either didn't recall, or I didn't make a big impression on him as far as my name was concerned. So who knows what happened there, but it did catch my attention. I'm like, I worked with the man for all those years and he doesn't know my name. Anyway, I'm going to cut him some slack on that. I'm sure if I had the chance to ask him about it, there would have been a simple explanation. So I was also listening to it on an audiobook, and who knows, perhaps the person who was narrating, who wasn't Joe, because it was done in 2013 or 2019, I think. So perhaps that person, messed it up. So anyway, as I said, I'm going to cut him some slack. Also, because I wasn't reading the written page I don't know what the actual book said. So if any of you have Ike's book in written form, perhaps you'd like to check and see how my name is written in that book, and let me know. He did speak a bit about each of the 9 seasons. He talked about Cora Beth when he found out in season 3 that Joe, that Ike was going to be getting married, and he offered to come in and read with the actresses, and they said no, that didn't need to happen. And then, of course, Ronnie Claire Edwards was cast, and she came in and did the matchmakers, and then they wanted to sign her in the next season to a commitment for the season, and she didn't want to. She was not living in LA and didn't really want to. She had a play she was working on, so she didn't want to be restricted to the series. And he had concerns, of course, because if he's supposed to be now married and his wife isn't around, he felt that could end up minimizing his stories, which is probably true. Ultimately, they worked it out with Ronnie Claire, and she did commit to the series. So that worked out well for both of them, I believe. Now, he did speak about those seasons from the perspective of Ike's character, what was happening with Ike and Cora Beth and some of the storylines they had. And so it is very much told from his perspective about the time he spent on the show. So if you choose to read the book, you'll probably note that too. So if you're looking for a lot of other information, if he wasn't there on those days, he wouldn't necessarily know. Ultimately, Joe did about 172 episodes. Now, we did a lot of 2-part episodes. So sometimes those were counted as 1, sometimes they were counted as 2. So that number is probably a little fudgy in terms of, how many hours of shows he was in. Plus, he was in all 6 of the reunion movies. Beyond those aspects, the other thing that always stood out to me about Joe was he had a lovely voice, and he talked about that from having started early singing in clubs and then studying with a voice teacher and really developing his voice and his repertoire. And we got to see that occasionally on the Waltons, where we heard Ike sing.
I missed you so I thought I'd die, but it's all over now. Throw my hat in the sky.
He was interested in doing that away from the Waltons. It wasn't initially planned as something for the series. And so he approached Eric, and Eric said, sure, why not? And so they got together with a music director and a choreographer, and they put together a little show, and they performed it at various different clubs and fairs and different sorts of events for, I'm not sure how long a period of time they did it for, but it seemed to be something that they both really enjoyed, and it was lovely that it got to be highlighted in that episode. I always enjoyed working with Joe and having him on set. He had a wonderful sense of humor. He was much smarter and sharper than Ike was. So he wasn't like Ike in that sense. He obviously had very good business sense because his real estate companies were very successful. And so I didn't get to spend a lot of time with him away from the set as Eric did. Eric continued to have lunch with him at least once a month for the rest of Joe's life. So they were probably the closest of outside of the set. So I thought that was very nice to hear. So Eric could probably shed more light on other aspects of Joe and his life, but I really enjoyed having this opportunity to read his book and learn more about his life. So if you get a chance, I suggest you pick it up and give it a read, or like I did, give it a listen. It is short and entertaining. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. I hope you have enjoyed learning more about Joe Conley, who played Ike Godsey. I'll be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons, more of your questions with an Ask Judy. This was kind of an Ask Judy, as was the one about the Baldwin sisters. So I'm going to be picking up more of these types of episodes and learning a little bit more about the lives of some of the other people on the show. And I'll also have some more special guests. Thanks for watching.